What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a valued member of our hospitality community with over 30 years of experience. She has an enlightened eye for design. She consistently composes and collaborates with world-class teams of architects and designers to execute unique and innovative hotel concepts. She is the Senior Vice President of Design at Highgate Hotels. Ladies and gentlemen, Christina Zimmer. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be here.
It's so good to be here. And I know that 30 years of experience, we've experienced each other and we've been in the same places so many times. But I feel that I've really gotten to know you much better since you've transitioned over to the ownership side at Highgate. And I think that's important to share with everyone that through the pandemic, from before to after, I'm just so impressed by a few companies that actually came out of it much stronger. And Highgate is definitely one of those few in that fraternity or sorority of companies that have done that. And before we get into that journey from the design side to the ownership side, the topic of this conversation is defining hospitality. So in your experience, and you've been in our industry for so long, what does hospitality mean to you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for dating me by repeating twice how long I've been in this industry. So that's great. But, I have been doing this for a long time, and I think about hospitality a lot. I experience it. And I do think how people experience hospitality is almost like how they convey it too. So how you might have grown up influences what you think about when you're designing something, just your experiences over time influence, just how I remember this thing that I saw somewhere, or even back in childhood or last week. So experiences absolutely go to the definition. It's not about just, giving you a place to sleep and some food to eat. It's about much more than that. And in fact, I looked it up at Webster's dictionary. The original definition did come from the experiences that you would give to a guest. So
Right.
It's much deeper than just meeting the basic needs.
I completely agree. And again, with so many of these conversations, one of the things that I've experienced as far as, there's not like a black and white definition. It's more of this, all these Venn diagrams kind of create this little gray bundle of energy and feeling. But you were I really liked how you said it's about how you convey it, right? So hospitality can be conveyed in so many different facets, right? From hotel design and development, which is what you do, to just a simple dinner party, to a walk in the woods, if you will. But I think while we're in this world of hospitality design, I think what is so exciting and why people are drawn to this podcast is that invariably hospitality touches everything. And we can all learn from giving and receiving hospitality better. And if you think about conveying hospitality from your vocation, right? You're an architect and you work for one of the bigger hotel ownership companies and management companies. When you think about kicking off a new project, how do you convey hospitality, not just in what the project is, but in the teams you assemble and all the different stakeholders?
Right. Well, we want to have a good time doing it, and that kind of usually comes through in the outcome. You want people who are enthusiastic about the project. You mentioned before that Highgate came out of this pandemic even stronger, and I think that's true. And I've known Highgate for a very long time because they were my client before I even worked for them. So, they have we have a very good track record of coming out of hardships even stronger than before. And so we're led by some very smart people, and I'm thrilled to be there. I've been there almost like 6.5 years now. So it's been great.
Looking at people who come at design and working on a project by project as a designer, there's so much joy in just digging deep and diving deep into that singular project. But as you switch to the ownership side, it's a different mindset, right? Because you're actually not necessarily doing the design anymore. You're like conducting the symphony, if you will.
I've always actually been drawn to that in a way. Even way back when I was chatting with my husband, should I go back to school and get my MBA? What I really want to be is like the Medici, the one who is conducting that orchestra, who's a bit more behind the scenes. It's not my name blazed in glory. I don't really care about that. I really like the projects. I like being part of the projects and bringing something to life. I find it extremely, interesting. And I have been doing it for a long time, and it's new every time. Every time. And on the ownership side, in some ways, it's even more new every time because I get to work with different groups.
Yeah.
So we have a different designer on one project or the next. We're always trying to find the right designer for the project. I mean, I would say that's one of the most important things that, we do is making that alignment. And if you kind of get off a step at one point, nobody ever wants to rejigger that. It has happened. But by and large, we really want to make that first fit up front. And of course, we want to have a good time. But we also, of course, do demand excellence, and we demand something unique.
Yep.
I think most of our projects are in no way cookie cutter.
No, and I can speak from experience on that front too. I think, going back to where you said it's really about how you convey it, right, in everything you do. And then you just now you said it's really about what excites you and lights you up is really bringing it to life. How, as your journey went from being on the project as the designer to being on the ownership side, working with these really incredible, like entrepreneurial thinking, non-cookie cutter projects, how do you think how you approach a project has changed in how you convey hospitality and execute projects now?
Well, I would say, I was at Stonehill Taylor for, a good chunk of my career when I first landed in New York. And we can go backwards a bit ago to find out how I got here. But, great firm, really knows hospitality. And, I grew up with them. And most of the projects, especially in those days, I started there in 1999. We're very unique, nothing cookie cutter about the projects coming out of there. And I was fortunate enough to work both with Stonehill Taylor as designers and with other designers. So I always got to also see, what other designers were doing. And, it just gives you a breadth of who people are, how they think, what they do to get outside of your own environment every now and again. And so I had that fortunate kind of work at Stonehill Taylor, as well as then since then, obviously, since moving to the owner side.
One of the things that strikes me about Highgate is, schedules on every project are really intense. But on the Highgate ones, I think as far as approaching those non-cookie cutter projects and really being able to reposition them really quickly and faster than other people in the marketplace can do it, it's almost like you're printing money in a way, right? In the sense that the faster that you can get those rooms turned over, the faster you can bump the rate, and the more profitable the endeavor is. And I think a lot of that is a testament to how Highgate has grown through the pandemic. So when you look at projects and kind of conveying and bringing these things to life in crucibles of a schedule, how do you keep your head calm through the storm of opening projects?
Well, I guess some people that have worked with me will say that I don't always keep my head calm, so I'm sure there's some of that. But Of course, schedule is always important, and I do think that is a huge part of Highgate's success. They are looking at that in the bottom line, but they're also looking at the product 100%. Like, you can't reposition if you don't, actually pay attention to the design itself. So it is always a balancing act, and I do think that our role as designers within Highgate, and I'm not alone, but our part of our job is to, help our ownership groups understand the schedule, help our designers work to the schedule, find the critical path. What can we do to help move one thing along while we're working on something else? So, there is always a way forward, but at the end of the day, if you hurry up and build something and it's not good, you will have failed. People will have forgotten the schedule. So schedule is important, and we can't keep our eye off of that, but we also, always strive for that excellence. So I think of my job as partly helping people get there, helping people find that way forward to balance it and make it work.
It's almost like a coach.
Almost like a coach.
Or maybe a coach, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple other, I want to go back to some of the things that you said, because like this idea of bringing things to life and having a good time doing it. If you were to look back in your life or career let's just say on your journey, generally speaking, what do you think has drawn you to the world of hospitality, and from the idea of bringing projects to life, but also having a good time doing it? Like, how did you experience your journey and then wind up where you are today, the person I'm sitting across from?
Well, I'm going to rewind a little bit.
Okay.
So I've started my career actually in San Francisco as an architect working on high-end residential. And I liked it. As an architect, designer, you always want to be working on, with bigger budgets. You get to do a lot more. There's a lot more, sort of candy in luxury and higher end. And so that was great. However, you're also dealing a lot with personalities, people's personal money. It can get very uncomfortable, I guess I would say, at moments, and dealing in high-end residential. So I knew when I left San Francisco and eventually got a job that I didn't want to go back to high-end residential. I was going to find something else. In between there, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I left San Francisco with my then boyfriend, future husband, and we traveled in Europe. We ended up in Europe for over a year. And by the time we left San Francisco, we settled in New York. We were gone and not working for in the neighborhood of 14 to 15 months.
Oh, wow.
Which was amazing. And I'll talk about that more later.
And working as an architect, because both of you are architects, right?
Yes, my husband.
But working as architects, you made so much money, and you were able to. You just had like steamer trunks full of cash to go on that 14-month trip, right?
Yeah, no, it would take a lot of discipline and a lot of savings, and we drove across country in a U-Haul van and made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, and it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. But it was, so yeah, by the time we landed in Europe, and those hotels we stayed in were by far from the luxury property that I've, my husband will definitely call me a princess, and the kind of property that I stay at today. But, having that experience was important to us both. We really wanted to grow our own minds, and I call this time away is more or less like our own education in art and architecture of Western Europe. So we had a job, and that job was to, basically a city a week for about 5 months, and longer stays kind of in between. And we would go to museums, we would walk around cities, we'd experience the architecture. Back then Frank Gehry was doing like some amazing things, and we were practically tracing his evolution, and eventually got to Bilbao, Spain, and saw, because that museum had just opened, the Guggenheim Bilbao had just opened.
Oh, and that was
just
super
before
exciting.
we got there. Yeah, so very like a year or so. Anyway, that was just, and so I find that as like a baseline of my education was this self-education in art and architecture of Western Europe.
So a city a week, so that's 4 a month. So you basically
More
went
or
to
less.
20 cities.
Probably something like that or more. I mean, we also, we stayed for 2 months in Paris.
Oh.
We stayed for, we went skiing for a month. We stayed in Rome. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 months. We had a friend who was Roman, and so many funny stories about that, but he helped us get us jobs. So we were actually working as architects in Rome
Oh,
for
wow.
a few months. So that was a fun experience.
That must have been amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's just say more or less you're in 20 cities over 5 months, right? Some a little longer, some a little less.
Yeah.
And you're going on this exploration of art, architecture, culture, food,
Yes.
wine, everything.
Well, we were poor, and so the food and wine part, I would actually say like less on that, or a bottle of wine that we could buy at the liquor store. But culture is very important because you can get, not that I would say in 1 week you're super immersed in a culture, but the 2 months in Paris or the time in Rome, we did our best to immerse ourselves in the
I
culture.
would even say on the wine and the food, just from like having traveled a ton with my family, and just as myself, the dollar value of a bottle of wine or the food oftentimes is inversely proportional to like the amazingness of the experience,
Yeah.
right? Because I've had so many incredible meals and experiences with just the table wine, and
Yeah.
it's the best, and it's local, and just the regular food. I feel, and I don't know much about wine, so it's not like I like wine. It could be, if it's red or white, I'll like it.
Yeah.
I'm also easily, I'm able to suspend disbelief very easily. So if you were to tell me that there was a finish of vanilla and blackberries,
Right.
I would believe you. And I'm just like, okay, I get it. But let's say the 20 cities, if you were to pick your top 3 from that journey, what were your top 3?
Yeah, I can't do that. Each one is different. So, there is, there's a richness to all of them. And partly when you go back and again, start to define hospitality, it's sort of like the experience you had in each city. You might have been, and when you're traveling for that long, I was sick in one city, even though it might have been an amazing city, I was not feeling well, right? So there's some of that. I guess I have to give a shout out to Villefranche in southern France, but in part, and I'm going to go back for a minute. So you're talking about it doesn't take a lot of money, and it's true. We were staying at this really not nice hotel in Nice. And, the room was like damp, and I have vivid memories of that room and its dampness. But, every morning we would get up and we'd go to the local bakery, buy a baguette and some butter and jam, and sit on the beach and watch the sunrise. And that was our meal for that morning. And, probably, I'm sure we had a cafe au lait in there too. So it's extremely delicious, very local. It was so simple, nothing extravagant, and stands out as, one of the best meals, right? We did that for a few days. Eventually we had to leave Nice in that damp hotel room. I couldn't take it anymore. And that's what brought us to Villefranche, which hadn't actually been on our itinerary. And a friend of ours had been there a couple of years prior and turned us onto it. So we ended up in Villefranche and had a much better hotel there. So even though I say I was poor, some standards were still,
Your princess, your inner princess was satisfied.
For sure.
But also, in so many things that we all do, okay, we're attracted, going back to like the train of thought, we're attracted to the things that we love doing, right? So hospitality designed for you. But oftentimes those experiences that are just like, whoa, that wet room or that damp room or a work experience could almost be as valuable as following your passion and what you love, because sometimes you might not know what you're passionate about, what you love, but just knowing what that hot stove is to pull your hand away from often gives us more information moving forward. So you've talked about Villefranche a few times. If you were to think about going from a poor room experience, but also finding the wonders of the sunset and the boulangerie and the jam and the bread. But if you were to go from that hotel to the Villefranche, like, again, it's poor experience, great experience. Have you been back to it? And if you have been back to it, do you look at it from a different lens from when you were first there after that poor experience?
I have not been back to Villefranche. I've not, and I do have strong memories of it. I don't get to travel nearly as much as I want to. Mm-hmm. So in part, going back to a place is kind of hard to do. I feel like there's so many more experiences out there. I've we don't have like the summer house a lot of people do, or go back time after time to a destination like a lot of people do. We're usually going to different places, unless we have friends there, it's a different story. But I went back once to the same hotels, same resort. And it's like, it wasn't as good the second time. And I think for me anyway, that newness and exploration kind of really is key to, just my personal interest in travel.
Okay.
Want it to be different.
Awesome. And I'm kind of with you too. Even if I go for a run, I don't like going out and back. I like to do a loop because I don't like to see things that I just saw.
Oh yeah. My husband and I always say this, never go back the way you came.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
but like oftentimes, like living in New York City, you got to do the out and back. Otherwise you're running cross town and you're going to get hit by a car. So I managed to deal with that. So I know that your experience in Europe was incredible. It's hard to like pick a winner, if you will, a favorite city. But on your art/culture journey, is there a museum or work of art that you remember most fondly from that? And for instance, like what I'll share is, I remember in Rome, I went to Villa Borghese. I had no idea what anything was. I'd heard of Bernini a little bit, but to see those sculptures of Daphne and the hair and how he got that through I don't know, you could like see the strands of hair through the marble. It's amazing. Or going up to the Met here, I'm always drawn to these like paintings by Turner of, I don't know what I'm looking at, but I think that's a ship back there. I don't know what it is, but I'm drawn to that. Are there any other experiences at any museums or just out on the street that you were drawn to or remember most fondly?
I mean, I have a lot, so it's hard to narrow it down to any one or two. But I guess ultimately, and with some time has obviously gone by since we've had this trip, the memories that stand out the strongest are when I'm with friends and family. And I would say, if I'm going to straight up answer that question, it would be like the Contemporary Art Museum in Nice was a surprise, and loved it. And partly because it was a surprise and it wasn't art that I was used to looking at the time, and really was drawn to it. But if I step back, I say, well, maybe it was the Louisiana Museum in Denmark. So my mother...
The Louisiana Museum in Denmark. I didn't know there was one.
That's the name of the museum. It's called the Louisiana Museum. It's outside of Copenhagen. And my mother, she's passed now, but she was Danish. And she emigrated to the United States when she married my father, who's an American of Italian descent. So I have a lot of stories and memories about Denmark, and I've been there many times. I have cousins there and aunts and uncles there. So I lived there actually when I was in high school. I lived there for a year. So on this big trip, as John and I refer to it, the big trip when we were gone, we coordinated to be in Denmark at the same time as my mother. And so we were at our families and visiting, and then we went together to Copenhagen, and we stayed in this another crazy hotel, and because we didn't have family in Copenhagen at the time. And of course, back then they allowed smoking. So there's like a breakfast room that's like, just smoke like you wouldn't believe. The Danes used to smoke a lot.
And pickled herring.
Pickled herring, gotta have it. And then we went together to the Louisiana Museum, which is outside of Copenhagen. And it is a question. Beautiful.
On the Louisiana Museum, is it just called the Louisiana Museum, or is there some relation to the state of Louisiana? Is there any connection?
There is no relation to the state.
Oh, wow.
and I'm from Louisiana too.
I
So
know. That's why I
yeah,
was,
I know.
wow. Okay.
It's just called that, and I don't know why. Maybe it has. I'm not sure. We'll have to look that up. But it's actually a beautifully designed museum too. Very set in the landscape with lots of glass. Has incredible Yakimetis, and just it's a wonderful museum also as an experience. So not just, you know, room after room looking at art pieces and no windows. It's you're sort of in and out of the landscape, and that kind of connection to nature is also a very Danish thing. That, you know, you're not just you're always sort of in or about nature in Denmark, I think.
So hearing about the friends and family, and also this idea of experience, and going back to the baguette with the butter and the jam on the beach at Nice. How does that feeling, or did that feeling that you had, that incredible feeling of the small groups, family, friends, how did that influence you when you were doing residential and you went on this journey to come back and not do residential, but to find this career in hospitality design?
Well, partly it's just luck, but I came back and started looking for a job, and you know, let's face it, I was not working for somewhere between 14 and 15 months. I did a little bit of work there in Rome, but you know, so I wanted a job that, you know, would allow me time to explore New York, and you know, not something that I would have to be slaving over all the time. And at the time, Stonehill Taylor actually had a 35-hour work week.
Oh, wow.
So
Very ahead of the
I know.
curve here.
Unfortunately, for anybody who's working there today, I think that's long gone. But and I was like, well, this sounds pretty great. And they had some great projects, and they were just really kind of getting a lot of work on hospitality. So I didn't go into it thinking I wanted to work in hospitality projects, but I just spent a year like staying in hotels. I had a lot of really relevant experience as a guest. So got hired there, and, you know, worked. Ultimately, I was there for 15 years, worked my way up from project architect to principal, and have just such, you know, I learned hospitality there. There's no question, under the tutelage of Paul Taylor. And the firm grew from, when I joined in 1999, it was 17 people. And
Wow.
when I left, and they've grown since then, but when I left, I think it was 70. And the hospitality was by far the focus after, I would say, just my first couple of years there. Then we really focused on hospitality, and almost all the projects I did from then on were in some way, shape, or form a hotel project.
And when you were there, were you more on the architect side or on the interior side?
More on the architect side, and you know, I that did give me this unique perspective, like I said before, of having worked with different designers as well as our own design teams. And I have always considered myself an architect and designer. And I, you know, sometimes, you know, when the architect and somebody else is a designer can be a difficult role, but I also feel like, you know, if you don't have that good partnership, the project doesn't turn out well. So I have always prided myself on caring, even though, you know, it wasn't necessarily my name on the door, which I think is very important to the success of these kinds of projects.
Yeah, and also in hospitality, that idea of caring is really feeling, and if you're caring, you're really concerned with how others are feeling as well, right?
Right.
And that's why I really think this idea of whatever hospitality is, it transcends everything, and it can be applicable to every single industry, every vocation, every profession, because it's really about, from my perspective, just open-hearted listening and empathy.
Yeah.
Paul Taylor.
Yes.
So I've heard of Stonehill Taylor forever. I've done a lot of work with Stonehill Taylor, supplying furniture on projects. I only met Paul Taylor for the first time, I think it was the HD Awards last June, maybe?
Oh.
And he was there,
Yeah.
and he was I didn't know what to expect. And I was like, oh my God, he's so cool. And he exuded this like really cool energy that like I had a very limited interaction with him, but I just got the feeling that he just looks at things differently. And I don't know, he had like a magnetism about him. When you said that learning so much under the tutelage of him, like what did you appreciate most about him as a mentor?
Well, he was just that. And I mean, I still have a great relationship with Paul, and he and I get together every now and again. And I just saw his daughter Eve, who works there now. She and I were together at a conference last week, which is just thrilling that, she's kind of part of that business. Paul, he could read me like a book. Like, I don't understand exactly because I can't do it, but he knew exactly what would make me thrive, and he gave me those opportunities, and I always had him to kind of go back and check with things on, but ultimately he gave me a lot of rope, which is just what I always want. I'm sort of like, okay, I got this, let's go. So Paul was a really wonderful mentor in that way. And he's not necessarily out and about at all the conferences and that sort of thing. He's a very strong family man, a very good businessman, and I think he, I learned just a ton from that. And the culture at Stonehill Taylor has always been one of just that sort of family, and it's been 10 years since I left. So it's been a while since I've been there, but I still remain friends with everybody and have strong ties and the utmost of respect.
So I'm always curious, like for that magic, that superpower that mentors have and how they impact all of us. Like we've all had mentors. There's not just one, we all have many, and we all, I don't know, all of our successes, like we all stand on the shoulders of those before us, right? But it's interesting to hear you say that Paul could read you like a book, and his power was seeing kind of what made you thrive, or kind of what made you light up. How have you taken that, or have you been able to take any of that special sauce and apply it in your own life and practice?
I try. I'm definitely not as good at it as he is. And I feel like, actually, it's fairly recently at Highgate that I also got some sort of outside mentoring that I felt like in a short amount of time really helped. How did people perceive me? I definitely never really knew. I always kind of had my head down in my projects, and it's like all of a sudden was able to sort of spin it out a bit and see that, which was very helpful. So I don't know. I think I'm always growing and changing, and hopefully I'm better today at leading than I was. And just, but I have, actually, was it 2 years ago? 2 different people who used to work with me were honored at HD Next Gen, and I was just thrilled. Both of them gave me a little shout out. I was thrilled. I love being able to help people in any small way that I can.
And when you were thrilled, were you also surprised or thrilled? Were
That
you
they
like,
would succeed?
yeah.
Not at all surprised.
Oh no, were you surprised that they gave you a shout out?
Oh, I was in the audience.
Oh, okay.
So,
Because I'm always surprised by, in all the courses of, in the course of what we all do in our life, personal and professional, we have so many collisions with people, and I'm always surprised at how a simple conversation with someone, or listening, or I may share something where I forget about it. It's not like an important event, or it's not memorable to me. But then months or years later, I'll encounter that person again, and they'll be like, when we talked about that, like you really changed how I think about all these things. And to me, I was totally surprised because that wasn't the intention.
Right.
I was just talking.
Right. Well, I will say that one thing, as a woman of a certain age, I have had a fair number of women that I work with in various forms seek me out for advice. And I, part of me is like, gee, I don't really know why that is, but I partly I do, and and I enjoy helping where I can. And if, my door is always open. And just this morning, I was on the phone with another former Stonehill Taylor designer that she and I worked together on the Refinery Hotel in New York, one of the highlights of my career. That was a 3-woman team. That was I was principal in charge, Carmen was designer in charge, and Stephanie Liu was project architect. And we had a blast.
Wow.
And we did the whole thing, the architecture, the interiors, and it remains one of the highlights of my career, pulling that all together. I love it. So anyway, I stay in touch with a lot of people, and I'm always happy to help and sort of discuss, mentor, sometimes more on like the business side of things, like how to help somebody, see their way through.
Wonderful. And then if you, just going back further in your life, so you grew up in Louisiana.
Yes.
At what point in your childhood did you realize that you were super creative or drawn to a creative field? Or at what point did you know, even in your childhood, that this could be a potential path that you would take?
Well, I think I was actually, I mentioned before, I lived in Denmark for a year, and that kind of Danishness, coming from a Danish mother who lived in the US, and she always revered anything Danish, and there is a certain sensibility to Danish design that absolutely permeates the entire Danish society. Much more about quality over quantity, and finding the right thing. And so that has been just kind of how I grew up in that culture. So I've always been exploring that, but not necessarily particularly creative in the sense that I would sit down as a kid and draw or sketch or things like that. I never did. When I went and lived in Denmark, I had a friend of my sister's who had actually gone on to become, in architecture school, and I met them, talked to them, and I thought, well, this could be cool. I love this. And I love looking at the plans. When I was a kid, we moved from Virginia to Louisiana. We were going to build a house. I was completely into the plans. I loved looking at the plan book.
How old were you then?
We moved when I was in 6th grade.
6th grade. Okay, so that's probably 11.
I was like 11. Yeah. So, and before we moved down, we were going to build this house. And so I was studying the plan book. So that was kind of early, always loved that. So I've always had this kind of like infused care about design, a bit of the technical side. And of course, then everybody always says, well, it's a perfect architect. So, after meeting the architect, I just came back, and I wasn't sure at first it would be good for me. So it was actually something I did when I transferred at college. It wasn't something I started right off. So I transferred into it. And then, I love it. And I also love the fact that there are lots of avenues within the profession to go. So whether it is interior design, project management, construction, there's a lot of different ways you can go. And, being able to sort of touch lots of those keeps things interesting.
What did you start off as when you went to college that you switched into architecture?
Business, I think. It was just generic, just trying to find my way. So, and then architecture was a 5-year program. And so I ended up at school for 6 years, but
at Louisiana State.
And then I immediately moved to San Francisco right after that. So with some girlfriends, packed the car up, drove across country.
Oh, so you all lived with like a group of friends in San Francisco?
Well, our first girlfriend, we dropped her off in LA. She's settled there. And my other girlfriend and I moved to San Francisco together and got on our feet, and were roommates, and eventually got jobs, and eventually met my husband. And so I was in San Francisco for 7 years.
Wow. My first adult experience after college was also San Francisco. And it was such a magical place to start a career. I feel like it's, I don't know, I feel like everyone would love to live in San Francisco, but many wind up going to other big cities around because they're not sure what to do. But to me, it just had this kind of magical Tales of the City
Yes.
kind of experience. And I didn't know what Tales of the City was when I moved there, but I think I wound up watching it. No, I read it. I read that Amistad Maupin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I read that
but
book.
the Laura Linney.
And then I watched the Laura Linney
So good.
PBS thing,
Yeah.
and it was just such a magical. I don't know. It just struck this nerve.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you to leave San Francisco?
In a way, no, because I had met John by then, and what happens with a lot of young people when you move to a big city is a lot of people start heading back home after a certain amount of time. So you sort of either stay and put your roots down, or you head back. And so out of our group of friends, many of them had started to leave, and we kind of looked around and we're like, wow, we're really like the last ones here. And his family was outside. They were scattered. He comes from a very big family, but my family was in Louisiana, and we just said, it's a good time. And we were always interested in New York as architects, the place to really, build big stuff. And San Francisco would have a big project, and next thing you know, they're bringing an architect from New York to do it. And you're like, what the heck? So we decided we needed to eventually settle in New York. So that was the plan when we set off in our truck across country.
It's like waiting for Guffman, right? The big guy from New York's coming. Or the big gal from New York's there. It's always the New York powerhouse is coming.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, yeah, I'll move somewhere and I'll get paid New York wages. And although San Francisco is pretty expensive, so.
San Francisco is expensive, but I loved it, and getting away from home and on my own and with my friends, and then meeting John. I mean, it was an incredible time. And like you said, it's a very magical city. And I'm going back now actually for work. So I've been more in the last couple of years than I was in the previous 20. And I still love it.
Well, also Highgate recently completed a project there that got a very high sustainability rating as well.
Yes.
The park.
It was the Park Central,
San
Francisco, and now it's the Hyatt.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Worked with. I wasn't involved in that project, so I can't claim any credit for it. But yeah, we are big into sustainability at Highgate. There's a big push to be careful, not just on the operation side, but on the design side, and watching where we're sourcing our furniture and materials from, and trying to make sure that, because they do get thrown out so much, and they get heavily used. How can we make them last? How can we reinvent them? How can we source sustainably? It's important.
Yeah. Well, I can just say from my experience, your Highgate's push with sustainability, it really helped us at Berman Faulk formalize all of these processes that we were doing and start to measure them. And it's interesting because sometimes, and it's so aligned with our values too, because sometimes it's like holding up a mirror at yourself, right? But you don't really know what you're looking at until you actually start measuring it. And I think, again, as a huge player in this industry, to be able to mandate that, or to make that, not necessarily mandated, but like to have that be a driving force in the projects you're doing, and how you execute projects, and how you assemble the teams, and how you kick a project off. It's pretty awesome, because you can change the way things are done. You can change the status quo. So just from my experience, I'm really glad that you guys kind of put your foot down, so to speak. And it's been a cool experience for us.
I'm glad. Yeah. Because it is, you can't really affect change until you know your baseline, right?
Totally.
So the measurement aspect is important, and trying to get, there's always so many factors on any project, and schedule you mentioned before, and budget, but, trying to have a mindset from the outset that this is also important, and how we, our footprint is important, it's another factor. You have to kind of figure it out.
One of the things I really loved about it in the measuring from the cradle to grave is it's very easy to see where you're doing well, but it's also cool to see the points where you suck. So like, for instance, on packaging, everyone sucks on packaging. But that one also was like a really low hanging fruit that it's like, hey, how can we think about this differently and improve our score so that we become better. So, getting rid of a lot of styrofoam packing, experimenting with new, different materials that are recyclable and from post-consumer recycled content, it is interesting. And I think we would have gotten there eventually, but just being able to look at that mirror again, it was like, oh, well, this is an easy one to improve. Let's pick that one and see if we can create a story from that.
That's
So,
great.
Yeah.
I'm
So
so glad to hear it.
yeah. So
really glad to hear it.
I and we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, your journey from building your home, moving to Louisiana, all the way to where you are now. As you look forward in this position of where you are, what's exciting you most about what you see out there?
Well, I think, the industry continues to evolve. And, and the words become almost like repetitive. And we have to be careful that they don't lose their meaning. But, hyper local, experientially driven, all these things that I feel that as a young person, traveling and staying in a damp hotel room in Nice, are, things that it's not just, honestly, it's not just about the design. There's so much more that goes into that guests having that memorable experience. So keeping our eye on what that is, how to achieve it, how to evolve it, how to get, the next project to be better than the last, and in whatever way, shape, or form that might be. Design. Can we have more fun? Can we get closer to budget? Can we, can we make this next one more sustainable? I think always trying to improve. And it's like, if you think you've already got it all, isn't that kind of boring? Like, always trying to make it the next one just a little bit better, a little bit different.
Hyper local and experiential. Recently, I had an experience where we went to Paris as a family. It was about a year ago for spring break.
Nice.
And we stayed at a hotel, and it actually was a great hotel. It was Kimpton's first property in Paris. It was actually awesome. I think it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site for the lobby and the stairway. It's like an MC Escher painting. It's crazy.
Cool.
But as far as looking for things to do around there, we looked, when I say we, my wife, looked at Airbnb and found experiences, local experiences. So we found this artist, and she met us up in the Tuileries. I'm not pronouncing it. My French is not good. With all of this watercoloring equipment and paraphernalia. And then we wound up just painting, and she was teaching us watercoloring technique.
Oh, how fabulous.
With the kids. It was awesome.
Oh, I love that.
And I think that, Airbnb terrifies me, but also excites me, because those hyper local experiences also can inform what we're doing on the regular on the hotel side. And I think together that competition makes us all better, because we have to think differently to succeed. And that's kind of that marketplace of ideas with competition. So it's exciting to think about that and how you execute on hyper local and experiential.
Yeah.
Is there a specific example that you could share of a project that you're working on where you're really like peeling back the onion on hyper local and experiential?
Well, I want to say all of them, honestly. It's probably, and how much it comes through in the design, you're always kind of like double checking too. But I'm working on a project right now. I mean, honestly, like, I tell people my project list or where they are, everybody's like, oh my God, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've got projects in Laguna Beach, California, amazing, right on the water. Monterey, California, amazing, right on the water. Portland, Maine, one of my favorite cities. Scottsdale. So great projects all over the country. And with different designers on each one. I don't think I'm working with any of one designer on two, although my colleagues might be. But yeah, so it's like also allowing the designers that space to, define that first. I try very hard not to dictate, but to encourage, react. You got to have the practical side. Of course, a lot of this is like, oh, that's not going to wear well. Those kinds of practical things come to play. But we absolutely are looking for the designers to be the ones more immersed in the project than we are, defining that kind of localness and what they think it is, and bringing it to the table. And not that we won't have our own opinion or want to infuse something else that we might have, but I think designers are just really great at it. And we're working with some just incredible people right now.
Awesome.
It's great.
Well, I can't wait to learn more about those. If we go back in time to that, your 11-year-old self looking at the architecture books, or the designs of the house that you guys are building, and kind of where you found that you were really intrigued, but maybe didn't necessarily know your path. And then the Christina that I'm speaking to now appears in front of your 11-year-old self. As a mentor to yourself, what kind of advice can you give to yourself?
Just always be curious, keep thinking about, well, sure, I'm on this path, but what else, could I look at? And, and I don't just mean that from a career standpoint, it's a life approach standpoint. Just always approaching things like you're never stuck anywhere, So if this is, you started in business, it's kind of boring, not really what my thing was. I was always interested in those architecture books. Let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? And so pushing yourself to keep trying new things, leave Louisiana, move to San Francisco, leave San Francisco, travel in Europe, move to New York. I'm much more stable now, but, trying different things. There's no failure in that. Just try it.
And I feel like it goes back to how we originally started the conversation, where it's all of these changes really bring new experience to life, right?
Yes.
And inertia it could be a real anchor at a certain point. So I think, and so many of these conversations with people about hospitality, it is that experience.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're all drawn to that change of experience, and it's a really cool tribe. And the other thing is, we were talking about this before we hit record, but you go to if I go to a cocktail party, or you go to a cocktail party that's not industry related, like it's family, friends, neighborhood, and we say what we do, I furnish hotels, you design and build hotels. They're like, wait, people actually do that? It's not like Hilton or Marriott or Accor, or like these brands don't do that.
Yeah.
And it really leads into a 20 questions rather than like, oh yeah, I'm on a hedge fund. I work on a hedge fund. It's like, oh, okay, great. But I feel like everyone is always so curious about working in a place where we create these experiences for others. Do you find that?
For sure. And I think, especially working at Highgate Hotels, anybody outside of the industry has no idea who Highgate Hotels is for the most part. But within the industry, sometimes I'm still struck. Oh, you know who we are? And they're like, yes, of course. But Highgate is a big player within the industry. But when you talk outside of it, not known, and people didn't understand that. Well, they assumed that the Hilton owned the property, ran the property. They're everything. It's like, oh, there's multiple entities involved along the way here. So yeah, it's a unique business that affords, I think, also lots of different places within it. Purchasing agents. What a fabulous and unique job outside of hospitality. Somebody be like, what the heck is that?
No one has ever heard of that. And that's where I got my start too. And it's a vital component to collaboration and creating all of these incredible projects. I think it's also, I don't know if this superlative is still in effect, but I feel like it is. Highgate manages manages and or owns more hotel rooms in New York City than anyone else? Is that possible?
Not owns, but operates would be the word I would use.
Owns
Yeah,
and operates.
just operates in
Okay.
New York City. Yes, we are the largest operator of hotel rooms in New York.
And
Yeah.
okay, so then also going back to that before pandemic, after pandemic, and just that growth and abundance, mindset of abundance that the people who run Highgate have, as hard hit as New York was in the pandemic, to have that many rooms and still
Yeah.
come out so far ahead, it's really incredible.
It's exciting. I mean, we've just announced, a whole portfolio in Portugal. I'm very excited to have had a couple of calls with people just looking to staff up in Portugal. Of course, we bought huge portfolios of select service properties across the United States. There's Peru, the projects I just mentioned, those are all post-pandemic. So yes, very nimble and approach to being able to work in lots of different markets and see that kind of what Highgate brings to the table of seeing the vision in something, and then we help bring it to life. Is
And that's
fantastic.
another thing which I want to experiment with this podcast, like when I post it. The team you currently have is not going to be able to execute on all those projects. You're always growing and looking for new great people.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
when I post this out there, because I know that you guys are always looking for really great people to join the team and grow on the design and construction side, and I'm sure all other parts. But share with us like kind of what you're looking for in the near future.
Well, we do have a couple of job postings currently out there. I think we're looking for another design director and for a New York City position, and another director of construction also in New York. So yeah, definitely beefing the team up. Also in Europe, we are looking for people for that Portugal. And, again, we're looking for people in all, that's in Highgate, yes, but also those designers. So again, constantly looking for the designers to pair up the right designer for the project.
Awesome. I'll experiment with that. I know you've shared some job postings or job listings or job descriptions with me. So I'm going to experiment with the reach of this and see if we can help fill those for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome.
That'd be great.
And we'll post all that too. But in the meantime, if people wanted to learn more about you or Highgate, how do they do that?
Well, I'm on all the normal, social media stuff, although I'm not the biggest poster. Maybe one year it'll be a New Year's resolution, but not this year.
You're too busy
Find
doing
me, I'm
other
too
stuff.
busy. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and that would be probably the best way.
Awesome. And we'll also put the Highgate company website. Maybe if there's a Highgate careers thing there, we can put that in there as well.
Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Christina, this has been awesome.
This has been great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And all you people out there who are listening or watching, I just want to say thank you. And if this changed your ideas on what hospitality is and how to deliver it to people, please pass it along. We're growing by word of mouth, and thank you. We'll catch you next time.